Sam, welcome to the Change Champions podcast. Awesome to have you on. And we were just talking a little bit before we hit record here about all the things we'd like to to cover. And I'm actually for time's sake too, because you have 30 plus years business experience, coaching
Mhm.
experience, entrepreneurship. There's so much ground we could cover.
Yeah.
And for people who are, hearing your name for the first time, seeing you for the first time, I'm wondering, is it possible if I were to ask you to not, cover your resume, which is lengthy and on LinkedIn and people can go check you out, but from your perspective, I'm really curious, especially knowing the conversation we're about to have. In your mind, what are some of the highlights on that journey for you? And maybe even lowlights, but just kind of what are the key, the kind of the milestones that stand out to you that have led up to the conscious consultant, which we'll talk more about in a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Riley, and thank you for having me on your show. I really appreciate the opportunity. I say I've been an entrepreneur since 1994 or 1993, and it's when I left my last kind of sort of, except for a little brief thing after I got married, full-time job. And I always kind of felt like I worked harder than the people in the cubicle next to me, but they didn't, my paycheck didn't necessarily reflect that.
Sure.
And I kind of felt like if I'm going to put all this work and effort into my job, my work, I want more benefit for it.
Right.
So I became a consultant, and I didn't know what to do, but a friend said, "Oh, talk to our friend John. He's a consultant." And I worked with him actually part-time for a year before a big enough project came along for me to hop full-time into working for myself and working with him.
Mm,
And so I think there was a big lesson in that things sometimes take a lot longer than we like. And so I learned over time, and I've had several different businesses, several different industries over the years, everything from anime and entertainment to aerospace and real estate, which was a big mistake. And so, yeah, it's having a wide breadth and a big variety of experience has really taught me a lot. And it's taught me to learn to really be flexible and to hold on to my intentions and my goals lightly, because sometimes life has a much better idea in store for us than we have for ourselves.
I I'm hearing you say that, I'm reminded of part of my journey, which I've not explored real estate. Many of the other, milestones along the way that I'm sure you've experienced. It's interesting that I've been a little bit more, probably from the outside perspective, a little more focused on specifically the business space, even though I started
Mm,
in sports psychology.
mm,
So completely different there, so it seems. And yet I also have, I'd say, that same feeling where, because I had a lot of breadth within business, working with a lot of different businesses, different startups, all in like a similar space, but just having, a dozen different kinds of entrepreneurs that I got to work with. I also, from like an operations perspective, felt that same sort of breadth that you are talking about, where it was like you look at things from lots of different angles. You get to see the highs and the lows, the how long this takes this person, or this process takes that person. And it's interesting that, in my experience, like the deeper you go into something, it's almost it almost seems like it at the same time gets wider and wider, like because there's more and more that you know. How do you say that? Have you ever heard that you know what you know things that you don't know, and
no,
then there's things you don't know, and you just,
right.
that it gets bigger and bigger as you get older and more experienced. Is that, does that, any of that language resonate with you in terms of like experiencing lots of things before kind of zeroing in on what you do today, which we can talk about in a second?
Um, yeah, it's kind of like it's like the more you know you don't know. Absolutely. And the more I learn, the more I know I have so much more to learn. But the other thing that really surprises me is sometimes there are things that I did and learned years and years and decades ago that suddenly that experience becomes relevant to something I'm doing today. And so it's really interesting how sometimes we learn something or we're in a situation and then it ends and we think like, "That was a total waste of time. Why did I even bother with that?" And then years later, you end up having to do something where that experience actually helped you a lot with something new. So it's kind of like, I guess it's learning just to be really present to what life offers and not to judge it and not to make it right or wrong. And it's like, the main thing is, are you enjoying it or you're not enjoying it? And I
Hmm.
mean, if you're not enjoying it, like, that's okay. Sometimes we do things we don't enjoy in order for a certain payoff. As long as we're doing it consciously, as long as we're really being present to the fact that, like, I'm making this choice, I'm doing it for a reason. Like, for years after having my own business, after I got married, and one business, I just shut it down, and I went and got a job for 9 months until they fired me because I just wouldn't play the office politics. I made a mistake, and, it just the environment got so toxic. I was glad that they let me go. And so, but I did that very consciously. I didn't really wanna do it, but I'm like, "Look, I just got married. We need to make some money. Let me do this for a period of time," and I did. And then once they let me go, actually, I was perfect timing because I went with my wife, who's from China, back to China for like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, which they weren't gonna let me go. Originally, I was just gonna go for 2 weeks because that's all they would give me.
Hmm.
So it actually gave me the opportunity to spend more time with her in her home country. So, I did it very consciously. I don't regret it at all, and it was what it was. So, again, we don't always know why we make a decision that we make and how it's going to serve us in our life. And even if we don't enjoy it, even if it's not filling our soul, as long as we're doing it in a conscious manner, it's okay.
Well, hindsight's 2020, right? That's as people say, and there's a framework that I've used and actually first developed and learned from sports psychology that I now use with our clients today. And the simplest way of saying it is just when you are making a decision or when you have a change or new information coming in, it's just instead of judging it as good or bad or right or wrong, it's just saying, does this help or does this hurt?
Mhm.
And that's it. Is this helping me move closer to my goals or further away from?
Right.
And really, if life is this kind of winding path and journey, then it's never going to be a perfect
Right.
straight shot or straight as an arrow. Like you're going to be there's this sort of picture that comes to mind of, hiking through the woods or the mountains
Yeah.
and you climb up a peak so that you can see where the next one is. And then you climb back down and you have another moment of clarity and then you climb back down. And so I think what you're describing is, a life filled with intention and presence to be able to take things for what they are. And it's information. And then it's what do you do with it? How do you learn from it? How can you be better or be better or improve by it or through it. And it makes that, at least in my mind, connects to the conscious half of the conscious consultant. And I'm curious, actually, maybe a kind of a two-part question here, because first you said you got into consulting part-time and then full-time,
Hmm.
and eventually, I don't think you started as the conscious consultant.
No.
So I'm curious if kind of clear things up, and for people listening, point A, I'm curious if you would or could just define what consulting even means or especially meant to you back then. And then I think it'd be easier with that context to explain and differentiate how you've arrived at the
Mm.
conscious consultant today.
Yeah. I mean, consulting, back when I was doing it, it was computer consulting, right? It's somebody has a need for outside expertise and they bring you in not as an employee, but as a contractor, as a consultant to give advice, to give a different perspective, to do a certain task or a project or something. And when you're done, you're done. And that's the end of the relationship. So it's a very flexible, it's a very, I don't know, optional type of relationship, right? It's not that you're bound to each other for the rest of your lives. So for me, consulting is really offering the advice and the perspective and sometimes a service or a product that meets the need at the moment.
I like that. how you ended that too, meeting the need at the moment. Really, something we talk about in coaching all the time is meeting the client where they're at, or a term I learned in counseling was pace before you lead, which is this idea of, again, kind of meet them where they're at, see what they actually need first, listen first, empathize
Mhm.
first,
Mhm.
all those kinds of things. And then you might layer in some advice or guidance depending on the what the need is. And
Right.
sometimes people, the need is just it's just the space to like to listen
Yeah.
and unpack, and that turns into another conversation. So that's what consulting was. That was the specific kind of niche that you were in to start out. And so when did this transition and this or evolution take place into the conscious consult? How did that come about? And what does that mean to you, the
Oh,
conscious consult?
well, it happened much later. It probably happened after about 15 years. Yeah, and, I often say to people that I had been sort of on a very spiritual path early in life, due to some friends that I met while I was in college, and had a certain experience that lasted a period of time. And then things kind of fell apart. It went in a very bad direction, and I extricated myself from the situation. And it took a long time for me to heal. And it was kind of like after that experience, I didn't know what to believe in. I didn't know what was real. I kind of just sort of threw myself into work and just making money.
Would you say the spiritual part of yourself was kind of had died or was dormant at that time?
I wouldn't say died. I would say it was lost.
Hmm.
It was
Okay.
kind of like, I would say I was kind of just floating on the waves of life. Didn't
Well,
really know where to go, what to do, and just really just needed my own healing.
do you mind me asking what age that was?
Probably from my 20s to my late 30s.
Yeah. I think that's a common time for that to happen anyway. But it sounds like you have this extra, I don't know how much you want to unpack there, but the spiritual, what does that mean to you? Spiritual, yes.
To me, spiritual can mean many things, and to me, it's just about being connected to spirit, whatever spirit means to you. I
Got
mean,
it.
for me, it was I guess it was more than just spiritual because a lot of my identity was tied up in it.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, when things kind of fell apart, I kind of like I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I believed in. I didn't really
Yeah.
know. I didn't have a direction in my life anymore.
Yeah.
And so then what happened, probably about 15 years later, I like to say the universe will have its way with us, whether we want it to or not. And it kind of slowly but surely kind of nudged me back in that direction. In that nudging back in the direction, it happened after I got married and kind of, went to some seminar that was around, personal development. And it's like, oh, yeah, I used to have some old books around this stuff and audios, and I started sharing it with my wife, and she got into it, and then, got back into like the whole Tony Robbins, T. Harv Eker, Millionaire Mindset, all this stuff. And then I met like a local group of people called the New York Power Team. That were basically people who are into like personal development, landmark, that kind of stuff, and would
Mhm.
meet once a month. And the organizers would like bring in an outside speaker who typically would talk about something. And usually they talk about some kind of healing modality or something, or some personal development modality. And then they'd have a workshop. And, they were coming to talk to sell you on the workshop. And so I'd go to the meetings, and I'd come home and tell my wife about it. My wife usually didn't come to the meetings. And it's like, oh, this guy talked about this great thing. It sounded like some wonderful healing modality. Would you like to come with me this weekend to the workshop? And she's a therapist and she's relatively open. And she say, sure. And so I was taking all these workshops and learning things like the Sedona method, Brandon Bay's The Journey, all kinds of different things, not ever with the slightest intention of me becoming a healer, but it was for my own healing. It was because I knew that there were emotional scars, there were psychological scars that I hadn't healed. And so I would kept taking these workshops, and sometimes my wife would come to me, sometimes not. And I remember I was at this one workshop, and it was learning some very intuitive healing modality. And it's kind of, the workshop was the same the way most of these workshops are, where They give you the background, the history of the modality, they teach you the modality, and then they pair you up and you work on it. And the second day, they asked for volunteers, and this woman raises her hand and says, "I don't feel well. I'd love for someone to work on me." I raised my hand. I was dying to try this out. I get up in front of the class and I do the method on this woman for like 5 minutes. It's very fast. And I'm like, "So how do you feel?" And she's like, "Oh my God, I can breathe." I go, "Oh, well, that's a good thing." She goes, "No, no, no. Listen." She takes this deep breath. "You hear that?" I go, "Yeah, it sounds good." She goes, "No, there's no congestion." I go, "Yeah." She goes, "No, you don't understand. I've had chronic bronchitis since I was 6 years old in South Africa. I haven't been able to breathe like this since I was a little kid."
Whoa.
And I was like, "Oh, oh, oh." And then like the little light bulb went off in the back of my mind. It was like, "Oh, like this isn't just for me. Like I can actually use this to help other people." But I'm like, "What do you do with this? I'm a business guy. I'm not a
Computer
healer.
consultant. Yeah.
I'm a
It's a totally
consultant."
different world.
And so I was just kind of sitting with it for a day or two. And then I mean, I don't want to say I meditated because I wasn't actually meditating at the time, but I sat with it.
Yeah.
And then it kinda came up, through, just being open. It's like, well, you're still a consultant, you're just a different kinda consultant. Then the idea of the conscious consultant was sort of born, and it was this idea of, like, I still do what I do. I still was coaching people and still consulting with people, but I did it from a different perspective now because I was
Mm.
able to tap in and feel the energy around things and look at things in a deeper way. And so I was sat with it and I was like, if I'm really going to do this, I've got to be very honest and open and upfront with it. And so I changed my LinkedIn profile. It was the first thing I did. I went to LinkedIn. I changed my title to the conscious consultant and the business conscious consultant. And I started doing that, and I worked with, several people in the beginning just for free and got some testimonials, and then people started to pay me. And I was like, "Wow, this is great." And it really started to take my life in a whole different direction. I learned Reiki, I learned theta healing, I learned all these different modalities. And then, meetups started becoming popular at the time, and I started attending these metaphysical club meetup groups and started studying with spiritual teachers again. And it was sort of, again, like the life kind of nudged me a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there. And then before I knew it, I'm hip deep in the spiritual community of Manhattan. And it was so interesting how it happened because if life had just thrown me back into the middle of it, I would have gone kicking and screaming the opposite direction because of my prior experience. But because life was very gentle and it was took time, then it was like, oh yeah, like I know this stuff. It's familiar to me. It's not, and I was
Kind of
able to
waded in.
yeah, I kinda
Yeah.
am like, "Okay, I can deal with this now because 'cause I've done some healing work, and it's not all crazy lunatic stuff, like,
Mm.
there's something real here." I was just too young and too naive at the time to really see what was going on, and so, sometimes going slow is the fastest way we can go.
When I was the chief operating officer for a mental health startup, an employee that we brought on who was former Royal Marine. He fought in, I believe it was Afghanistan. We didn't talk a whole lot about it, the war stories, but he specifically had shared with us in this one meeting how they're sort of saying that like their motto that kept them alive is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And
Mm,
it's just especially in probably the highest pressure, life or death, right? Situations. And it's very much like just stay focused, calm, present, and just information comes in, information goes out. Just do the best that you can in the moment with given the resources or the capabilities that you have. So there's always an analogy for business, right? Whether it's war or fitness or whatever. But I just first of all, candidly, I'll say that you named probably like 8 different modalities that I have never used or heard of before myself. Well, heard of a lot of, but have no experience in myself. So you're definitely the expert when it comes to those things. However, one thing I want to point out, and because I don't want to downplay experience or your like your story specifically, like the transition and transformation that you went through is as is I think most people's is whether they realize it or not is powerful and unique and captivating and worth unpacking. Probably, the time we have, we're glossing over, all the different moments and learning moments that are packed in there. But one of the things I want to pull out that gets just, I think, oversaid or overstated, and yet it's still important. I'm recognizing that completely organically, it sounds like you actually managed to further niche down, separate yourself. People might hear USP, unique selling proposition. You created a value proposition and a specific kind of unique approach that is specific to you and the audience that you're serving. And you got further and further into that, which just seemed, again, kind of what we talked about earlier, right? The deeper you got, the more this whole new world seemed to open up for you, both, but also professionally. It's kind of what I'm hearing. Is
Yeah.
that, yeah,
Well, here's the thing. It's like something rings true to us. We really, to serve us the best, it's about really being authentic and understanding that we're not here to get everybody to like us. It's okay if we change what our message is and we change what we offer, and it turns off a whole bunch of people, but it turns on a whole nother set of people.
definitely. Yeah.
And it really, for me, was just a lesson in learning to accept myself, learning to accept my experiences, what I went through, who I am as a person, and just be more authentic about it and real about it with other people. And when we do that, people really resonate with you. Now, look, I am nothing special. I'm a nice Jewish boy from the Bronx. I'm an average person. There's nothing like on my own radio show on the Conscious Consultant Hour. I've interviewed people who've had amazing lives, who've had deep spiritual experiences, who've had things happen to them that are just beyond imagination. That's not me. It was really more just paying attention to life, allowing life to be my guide and saying yes when things showed up. And it makes life very interesting. It's not very stable sometimes. It can be unnerving if there's not enough trust there.
Mhm.
But because I'd been through such a challenging, difficult time when I was younger, it kind of developed within me this sense of trust that life will take care of me, that somehow, even if it's not the way I expect, things will work out one way or another.
I think it's probably common for most people, but I can just say from my experience with the clients we work with, primarily coaches, consultants, people in this space, there is a palpable level of uncertainty, fear, anxiety, this fear of the unknown. A lot of times I kind of label that as scarcity mindset. And hearing you talk about your journey, I think is really, it seems like you've really embodied and developed a growth mindset and open-mindedness to, I mean, life. I could just
Mhm.
full stop right there, period. But I think the other thing in terms of developing that trust, it sounds like it's happened for you over time. But I'm also curious in terms of, I'll say, alignment and values, and this might segue into extending this conversation to the conscious consultant and kind of your experience in how you help other people, or how the transition piece, and we'll talk about that in a second. But from that business perspective, I guess I think there's, at least in my world, there's a lot of people that we talk to have this idea of, call it success, or their dream life, or whatever that rosy grass is greener picture looks like for them. Sometimes to make that vision come to life, it requires a certain amount of some combination of determination, effort, sacrifice, time, patience, fill in the blank. It depends what that picture looks like, but there's something that, some amount of inputs required to get a certain amount of outputs, or to paint this picture and make it real. And I think what I have observed is that a lot of people have this dissonance between what they say they want and then their actions and the life that they lead. And it sounds like you are very aligned in with the patience and the is a word you used, but trust in almost in yourself. Can you I see you have a thought coming to mind as I say this. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you want to add to that?
So there's something I want the audience to really be mindful and careful of, because I fell into this trap, which is sometimes our definition of success and what we think we want in life comes to us from society, from things on the outside that, oh, we should be millionaires. We should have, huge business, affect millions of people around the world. Like we have these big ideas, but it actually truly doesn't resonate with us.
Yeah.
Like maybe we don't need to touch a million people's lives. Maybe we just need to touch one person's life and that's enough. So the challenge with the vision of like what we want is it's very easy to get caught up society's idea of what success is. And one of the things I try and support people in is defining for themselves what success really means. Like what really feels good in the body when you talk about success, because success doesn't have to be about money. It doesn't have to be about fame, fortune, notoriety, stature. Success for some people is being able to spend more time with their family, being able to spend more time in nature, being able to travel more, not having responsibilities, being on new adventures. I mean, it can look like so many different things, and I just want to caution people against this sort of single-minded idea that business has around success, that it's about more profit. I mean, it might be for you, but it might not, and that's okay.
It's the
And you
conscious part, right? The
right.
intention behind it, right. And,
It's about
and
the authenticity
yeah,
of what really speaks to our heart and our
yeah.
soul from a deep place within, and not some superficial mind place of like, oh yeah, if I had all this money, like everything would be better. Well, you know what? That ain't necessarily true, because there are lots of people who have lots of money whose life is a complete mess. I mean, I'm sure you could even name at least a dozen famous people who've either overdosed, committed suicide, lost loved ones to suicide, who've had like awful trauma in their life. So money is not the answer to everything.
One of the things that seemed to really resonate when I was so this is my third business now that I've started. And I started out as a coach and then counselor really, then coach, then consultant, and now I've come back to this space to help some of those people, my former versions of myself out. One of the things that seems to have resonated is was really my why and the value behind starting this business, which a lot of people talk about that what you're talking like the idea of financial freedom or money or profit
Mm,
being kind of at the heart. Every single person that I've talked to and had this kind of conversation with, we talk about how there's a difference between freedom from versus freedom to. And what I
mhm.
mean by that is I've never heard anyone actually tell me that they just want to sit on a beach and sip pina coladas for the rest of their life. That's not, or insert drink of choice or whatever. That's it just simply just doesn't come up. Maybe a little piece would be like, oh, I'd like a vacation. And it's like, okay, and then what? Or
Right,
some traveling, and then what?
right.
And so more often it's not actually freedom from anything, it's freedom to fill in the blank.
Right.
And once we're clear on that, which it sounds like you help people do as well from a personal, deep spiritual level, even what I found is that oftentimes we already are more empowered than we even realize.
So
Like
what
once you have that clarity, you might actually realize you're already doing 90% of it.
right.
And how cool
Or
is
that
that
it
you can
doesn't
be
take a lot of money to
ex-
do the other part of it, that actually there are other resources instead of money that are actually more important.
and so where where we come in, myself and my business partner, what we realized is that if there is a missing gap, from my perspective, being able to monetize the gap So let's say the gap being like you still have bills to pay or something like that, or you don't have the freedom to fill in the blank all the time because you still have a day job or whatever the thing is, whatever the gap. If you can monetize some of those things that you are passionate about, aka business, then to me, and this is my own personal opinion, then you're already financially free because you're spending your time getting paid to do the things that you'd want to do with all your time anyway if you had all the money in the world. And so by consciously making that decision, I see business as really a vehicle to help close that gap and to help move you towards, again, closer to rather than further away from your goals. And for a lot of people, like you're saying, that's not even part of the picture. You don't need they might be perfectly content and already doing something that they love or are passionate about. They might already have a job or a full-time wage or whatever the thing is that has nothing to do with like they don't there is no there might not be a gap. There might not be a reason to start a business and maybe it's a you have a hobby or a passion project or who knows what the thing is for you, but it sounds like that's what we're both talking around from
Right,
different angles about
right,
kind of
and
success is personal.
right, absolutely, and our vision of it can change over time.
Yeah,
Like, what we define as success for ourselves today, 10 years from now might be completely different because 'cause we're at a different stage in life,
it's
and
okay.
now there are different priorities in our life.
Yeah.
So, lots of times when we're younger, it's all about making money and we wanna have more resources, and then as we get older, it's more about health, it's more about relationships, family, connection, community. So, to, again, not hold on to this concept of what we want so tightly, but with an open hand so that it can be organic and grow and shift and change over the years because none of us are the same today than we were 10 years ago.
Can I ask specifically about that? Because I think
No.
it sounds good if people can wrap their head around this, because it almost sounds like a paradox to focus on something, and have the trust or the confidence to go, to go confidently in one direction, and yet to also hold it. I think it's well, there's a saying for that. I think it's like strong opinions held lightly, something like that. Uh,
So there's a great example of this. I haven't done it in a long time. I used to teach a spoon bending workshop,
I love it. Tell me more.
and 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 really we spent like the first half of the workshop just talking all about physics and quantum mechanics and the way what we know the world really works, just to change people's mindset. And people I'm sure have a when I say spoon bending, they think, you're just holding the spoon and you
The
watch it
Matrix.
bend,
Yeah.
but actually you're trying to bend it with your hands. But the difference is noticing the moment when the metal actually becomes super soft and it bends without any effort at all. So
Mhm.
you're affecting sort of the structure of the metal, but you're still using your hands. And it was so funny because in order to really do it, you had to distract yourself. Like, you had to imagine bending the spoon, but then you distracted yourself. You talked to the person next to you about what you had for lunch yesterday or where you're going on vacation. And then, when you're not focused on it, then the spoon would bend. And I remember one time when my wife was sitting in and she's like, "Oh, wait a minute. I thought, afterwards wasn't able to bend her spoon during the workshop. And we're standing there in the subway system. And she's like, but wait a minute. I thought, we're supposed to focus on your goal and you're supposed to focus on your thing." I go, "Yeah, but you're not supposed to be attached to it." And so then she suddenly got it and she took out her spoon and bent it right away.
That is a beautiful distinction, is focused but not attached. And I wish there were more, there probably are words in the English language that to me is one of the best explanations and distinctions of the of that. I don't even like to use the word balance, but it is so much of life is a paradox and it's not black or white. It is, and there's nuance, and it
Mhm.
really, I've heard a long time ago something along the lines of the ability to hold opposing thoughts at the same time is a sign of intelligence or something like that. And
Right.
to me, that's sort of a similar idea of what you just explained, which is the idea of being focused and committed, and yet it's it's that cliche of like it's the journey, not the destination. It's a long game. It's a long term goal. It's not a I'm gonna beat my head against the wall until the spoon is bent, which
Right.
might happen in short sprints, if you
Right,
if you
but
need
it's
to or
really
want to.
about being present in the moment and what life is presenting in the moment because, yeah, we
Mm,
may have a general direction we wanna go, and let's say we have a business opportunity, but when we're really present to it, when we pay attention to it, maybe that business opportunity doesn't feel quite right, and so it doesn't make any logical sense not to take it, but it doesn't quite feel right, so we don't take it, and then we find out afterwards that the person we would have been in business with, is in jail for embezzlement or something. There's this inevitable quality of being able, when we're truly present to what's happening right here, right now,
mm,
that we can be leaning in a certain direction but that direction can shift and change because of new information or what's present in the moment or what feels right in the moment. So that's what I mean by holding it lightly, because the more presence we have, the more flexible and adaptable we are, and the more we can change on a dime and sometimes take advantage of something we couldn't even imagine 2 years ago that suddenly is a possibility, which if we had been stuck in like, no, I have to do it this way, we lose out on a great opportunity.
Speaking of bending spoons and being adaptable, what are what has been your experience? And I'm curious if you're willing to share some of your maybe tools or exercises or yeah, things of that nature that have helped you to do what we're talking about, to transition fully, to be present, to embrace change.
For me, what's really made the biggest difference in my life over the last 10 years really has been my relationship to these amazing compounds called psychedelics. And like most people, I experimented with them recreationally back when I was in high school, when I was a kid, and I didn't know what the F I was doing. But then, like, an opportunity came, and I actually wasn't even gonna go to the ceremony because I had studied with spiritual teachers who were very much against the idea of using substances, but just the confluence of situations at this one weekend, my wife was away, I had nothing to do, no workshops or anything, got invited to a ceremony, initially wasn't going to go, but ended up going, and it really changed my life, and the connection to myself, the connection to life, the understanding of nature and how the world works is so deepened over the last 10 years because of it. And it's seeing the and honoring this ancient wisdom that indigenous cultures have carried down through the centuries, even though they were persecuted for this kind of practice. And and I just find that more and more people are coming to this work now. There's literally a mental health crisis. So a lot of people are coming to psychedelics because of mental health situations. But for me, it's really turned into more a spiritual practice. And that's the way I sort of approach it. It's my way of connecting to my spirit by connecting to myself on a much deeper basis. It's helped me to be more confident. It's helped me to be a lot more present. It's helped me be a lot less angry. It's helped me in so many ways. It's helped the situation, the relationship with my wife. We've been doing this side by side for 10 years, and I have so many friends involved with this. I've seen so many people heal from this and grow as humans, as individuals, that it's really had a tremendous positive effect on myself. Now, there are people who abuse it and end up having a very negative effect, but that's why it's so important to work with a facilitator and a guide who's experienced, who has a lineage and a background and has had training so that you don't get yourself caught in a bad situation.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say for pretty much anything in life, right? Too much of anything
Yeah.
becomes a yeah, not so good. But admittedly, I don't have my own personal experience with psychedelics, but I am reminded of when I was the COO for a mental health consultancy, the CEO who does have an incredible backstory of born in a religious cult and kicked out and
Mm,
suicidal and depressed and alcoholic, all these,
oof.
crazy rock bottom type story. She then went on to be a keynote speaker and founded a business. And it was after she founded the business and was the CEO that she had, and this is in the UK, so I believe there might be some different narrative around. Usually they're a bit further ahead than we are in the US, but that's a different conversation. From her, my impression is that it's almost it almost seems as if the same way we, at least in the States, would probably think of like anesthesia, in the sense that like it's a tool that's used often with surgery to help facilitate a desired outcome, to help you heal or to help repair something or fill in the blank. And so, totally different circumstances. I don't know, maybe not, but it seems like it's that type of thinking makes it much more approachable, and then also ultimately useful, I think, and powerful if we think of it as a tool, as something that facilitates or growing or, but I don't know, maybe you tell me, is that the right thinking about it?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned anesthesia because actually the one psychedelic that is legal across the country is ketamine. And my wife actually happens to be a ketamine assisted psychotherapist. But ketamine is an anesthesia. It was used in anesthesia, but then they found this what they call off-label properties and use that it was extremely helpful. And so with ketamine, it creates this more internal space, so we're able to hold things and look at things that normally we can't. These pains, these traumas, this conditioning that we've had since we were children.
Mhm.
And so, like, that to me is like the greatest example of, look, this compound is useful for anesthesia. They still use it. And it also has this other purpose. And it's tremendously helped people. And again, going back to your point before, and people have overused it and done it to the extreme and have had problems because of that. So it's a tool like any other tool, but psychedelics are such a powerful tool. They're they're like an exponentiation of consciousness, I would say. But
For
but the
Go ahead.
the real key is not always the experience itself. It's not necessarily sitting in ceremony and having these mind-blowing experiences and insights and stuff. It's how do we take that and integrate it into our day-to-day lives? And like that to me was always the weakness in the personal help industry and the Tony Robbins of the world is you go and you have this weekend experience and it's a peak experience and it was wonderful and it was great. But then the majority of people go home and they don't change their lives because there wasn't the integration of what they had learned and experienced. And it's just as true as with psychedelics as it is for anything else.
So how would you integrate? How would you implement or make sure that a change or an experience, because just to add some context to this question, from my experience, we might be supporting people through changing their business, through implementing new systems and, adding some infrastructure or enhancing something, yeah, polishing, streamlining. And when you go through that change with support, with, helping hand, it might feel more palpable or more doable and you get through it. But then the real beauty and the magic is when I have a client reach out to me months later and say, "Hey, just got another new coaching client," or, "Hey, I just improved my offer even further," or, "I just increased my price," or, "I just," it's all, we focus on the business side of things, so those are the stories we hear. But in terms of, the work that you do, for someone to sustain the change and the improvement, or the, I almost want to use the conversation we're having, I almost want to use the word enlightenment, but that might be a heavy
Mhm.
too of it. But I guess just this awareness, I'll just say, for lack of a better word. If someone wanted to sustain and build upon that and continue to improve or make changes in their lives for the better, how would you integrate these things, and how would you, from for your work, for as a conscious consultant, what would you do for your clients?
So, I mean, a lot of the work I do now is in helping people with preparation and integration because, I just know like how much more you get out of something when you focus on those aspects. And so for integration, first of all, it's very individual. So it depends on the person's and their individual life. But for the vast majority of people, it starts with practice of self-care. And when I say self-care, self-care is an expression of honoring ourselves, of loving ourselves. And ultimately, most healing, almost 99% of the healing is all about self-love, all
Mhm.
about honoring ourselves. It's all about getting past those feelings of being awful, not wanted, not or for having value, not contributing. There are all these unworthiness, there are all these feelings that are fairly universal because of some kind of childhood trauma. And so to actually show ourselves that we love ourselves, the act of self-care and what self-care means, it could be different things for different people. It could be getting more rest, exercising more, eating healthier, putting more space in their daily schedule so they're not running from
Mhm.
thing to another thing constantly, so that they actually show their nervous system like, hey, you have value. And because I value you, I'm going to take care of you better than I did before. And when we start to do that, so much in our life starts to shift and change. We're able to set better boundaries with people. We're able to not just charge people more money, but we're able to honor the value we bring to a situation and not accept being undervalued by other people.
Mm.
And it can show up in so many different ways for a lot of people. Maybe they start a meditation practice or they start doing yoga. It could be so many things for so many different people. It is as varied and unique as there are people on the planet.
Pace before you lead. Meet them where they're at. For people listening that are interested in this type of work and the modalities you're talking about, just to maybe help them raise their hand. So, two things. One, what kind of context are we talking about? Like, what kind of people do you typically work with? Or if we talked about niche earlier, who does that who is that person, or what kind of situations are they in, or outcomes are they looking for that you normally speak to?
They're usually people, in some kind of transition or having some kind of challenge that they don't know how to navigate. They're people oftentimes who've tried all kinds of normal ways of trying to deal with stuff, and none of that has worked for them. They're open-minded and, they're people who are willing to look at themselves, to work on themselves, who are committed to improving themselves in some fashion. I work a lot with, entrepreneurs, small business owners, solo practitioners, maybe the people who've been in business for a while and they have experience under their belt, but they know they just don't feel good in their own skin. They could be happier than they are. And I mean, I've had some severe clients. I don't specialize in the real severe stuff, but I have worked with people with, severe trauma, childhood abuse, OCD. But really, I'm more like work with people who are pretty functional, but they just know that life could be better. They just know they could feel better in their own skin. They just know that they want more out of life and they're just not sure how to get it.
I I love hearing you say that, and there's a whole range of people out there, but I think sometimes people hear some of that stuff and they might think it's kind of woo woo, or it goes over their head. And what's interesting to me is that I think I'd said earlier, right, that I started in sports psychology, moved into operations and business, and felt like I was moving further away from the kind of human psychology side of things. And actually, in a lot of ways, I feel like I've come full circle. And in our accelerator program, it's actually focused on the business side of coaching and
Mm,
consulting. We actually include what we call master your mindset, which taps again into my original background for the reasons you're talking about. And it sounds like that's really where you kind of zoom in and just specialize and focus on is that internal.
right.
Yeah.
But more than mindset, I really feel into what's the underlying energetic pattern that's happening.
Yeah.
Because
It's a
normally if
deeper level.
yeah, because normally if someone's having a challenge in their business, they're also having some kind of challenge in their personal life.
Mhm.
and they may have that, and it might be showing up in other ways in their life. So I take a much more holistic view of things. And it's like, what's the big picture? What's the overall stuff? And then what's truly the underlying energy and pattern that's keeping it all around? So once we can identify it and unwind it and give space to it, then not just the business challenge gets better, like everything in life gets better.
I think it's much more common than people realize, and I've experienced it firsthand. I mean, been I've not been a licensed therapist. I also did not go the clinical route in my master's program, but I have butted up against some of those clinical issues sitting in that chair. And then I also have been in therapy myself and have realized that a lot of times that hurdle or that obstacle or that the friction or the thing that feels like it's getting in the way and you don't know what it is. I think it's exactly as you're describing. There's this, yeah, almost this energy, there's some shift that needs to happen, some unlock, some thing that you might not be aware of. And sense with the name conscious consultant, it brings me back to that level of intentionality, authenticity, and awareness, really, which is could be a whole nother conversation in of itself. But because of time, and if people are interested in having that conversation with you, Sam, where could people find you if they want to reach out or get in touch?
Well, my website is theconsciousconsultant.com, singular. It's not updated. I got to really update the content on there a little bit, but they can always reach me at Sam at the Conscious Consultant. And of course, you can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm Sam Liebowitz on LinkedIn, the Conscious Consultant. And pretty much if type in the Conscious Consultant anywhere on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, you'll find me.
And Liebowitz is Liebowitz.
You got it.
Okay. I want to make sure people can spell that if they're just listening and they want to
Yeah.
type it in on their phone or whatever device they're on. But Sam, I feel like I often feel this way with guests, but especially so today. There's so much just depth, I think, to the conversation we just had, and so much more, so many more layers that could be unpacked. And so I hope that people, if you're watching or listening, and any of this resonated with you at all, definitely reach out, and I'll make sure that those are highlighted in the description, show notes, so to speak. And just say thank you for taking the time and connecting with me and us, our audience, and sharing a bit of your story and yourself with us today.
My pleasure, Riley. My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'm here to serve. So if there's anything I can do to support your audience, please reach out. I'm happy to be there for you.
Definitely get that sense from you, Sam. Thanks so much.